with one of the criminal defense attorneys of Sean Diddy Combs, as the convicted rap mogul awaits sentencing in federal court and a decision on whether he'll actually be released from jail before sentencing. Oh, and by the way, there's also talk that he may get a pardon from the president. Yeah, all this going on. I get the chance to actually discuss what has been happening behind the scenes with Diddy's lawyer, Alexandra Shapiro.
For months now, the narrative surrounding Sean Diddy Combs has been one of collapse. A slow public unraveling from federal raids to bombshell lawsuits. From former insiders stepping forward to a culture that's begun to turn its back on one of hip-hop's most celebrated moguls.
About to do something that we've never done here on Sidebar. For a show that has covered every aspect of Sean Diddy Combs' criminal case, we are about to speak with one of his defense attorneys, Alexandra Shapiro. She is part of his legal team at trial. And the trial, by the way, that ended with Combs acquitted of the most serious charges: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking. He was convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. They call these the Mann Act violations, moving women and men across state lines for the purposes of commercial sex work. Now, we have talked about Alexandra Shapiro before. She was the attorney, for example, who argued for admitting that video of rape accuser Mia wishing Combs a happy birthday after the alleged assault. She played a key role in this case. And with questions about could Combs' convictions be thrown out, what could he be sentenced to, will he make bail before he's sentenced, can he get a presidential pardon, this feels like a great opportunity to get some insight into all this and certain aspects of the trial, like why didn't they call Christina Coram? All right, so let me get right into it. I am joined right now by Alexandra Shapiro herself. Thank you so much for taking the time to come here on Sidebar. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I have a lot of things I want to get into. We will talk about all the latest developments. But first of all, I got to ask, what was it like to be part of a team like this one? Because you know, every argument, every question, it is going to be focused, debated, on a national, maybe an international stage. This is a major case. And also, by the way, you were representing somebody and are representing somebody who for the past 2 years has taken quite a hit in the media and wasn't the most popular figure in the last 2 years. So to be representing Sean Combs in this massive trial, what was it like for you?
I mean, it was actually an amazing experience. First of all, the team was fantastic. I mean, I've never worked with so many great lawyers with different talents meshing together. And it was great after I've been working on this case since last September, dealing with the client being just bashed in the media, bashed by a ton of frivolous civil lawsuits that just sort of whipped up the hysteria against him. It was great to finally be able to help him have his day in court. And so the actual witnesses could be heard, and we had a chance to really expose a lot of the truth of what was really behind all of this.
Obviously, this is a win, right? He was acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing. Did there ever become a time, though, during the course of the trial, maybe in the first several weeks, when you're like, I'm a little nervous, I think he may get convicted of racketeering or sex trafficking, or you were confident throughout the prosecution's case that they just weren't reaching their burden?
Well, we felt good about the trial most of the time and we're confident, but you never can be too confident in a federal criminal trial. I mean, especially in the Southern District of New York, the government almost always wins, and it's a huge challenge and really, really difficult to win. So we were always concerned. There were points where it seemed to be going well, but you can never bank on that.
It has felt like the walls were closing in on Diddy from every angle. But just when it looked like there was no way out, Diddy's legal team has stunned the nation, not with denials, not with distractions, but with the quiet confidence of a defense that knows something the public doesn't. According to them, Diddy's freedom isn't slipping away. It's getting closer, much closer than anyone ever expected. It's a statement that immediately sends shockwaves through the industry because, to the outside world, the evidence has been mounting for months. Civil lawsuits painting a pattern of predatory behavior. Government agencies executing coordinated raids, former employees and romantic partners laying bare allegations that go back decades. And through it all, Diddy has remained almost completely silent. But now his legal team is doing the talking. And they're not just defending, they're projecting strength. They're signaling to the media, to prosecutors, and to the culture at large. Don't count him out, not yet. The sudden shift in tone isn't accidental. It's a calculated move. For months, public opinion has been shaped by headlines, by exposés, by rumors that have taken on the weight of truth.
I just want to understand something about the defense's argument. Was the defense's argument, hey, all the people who testified against Sean Combs were not being truthful, or we're taking their accounts, we're listening to their accounts, and what they're saying just didn't amount to a federal crime? Is it a mixture of both? Just trying to understand what the argument was.
I mean, I think it was a mixture. It depended on the witness. And a lot of the witnesses were telling the truth, but the truth didn't hurt Sean. It helped him. There were some people who were shading the truth. The great thing about it was there was a ton of evidence in written communications that people had created at the time, all these text messages. There were videos, and that really helped us expose the truth because these were things that had been recorded this is what people were, the girlfriends, others were saying to Sean at the time of the events in question. And so, there was really no way for the witnesses or the government to hide what was in the written documents.
Now, I will tell you, if you had been following what we've been doing here on Sidebar, Law and Crime, we call balls and strikes. So there were, during the course of the trial, we would say this was the strength of the prosecution, this was the strength of the defense. There was such effective cross-examination of these key witnesses that we all kind of wondered, was the defense going to call any witnesses? And you really did. And what was that decision? Because I understand there were witnesses who were planning to be called. There was an idea to put forward a defense case. There was a choice to not to do that. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what that strategy was about?
Sure. I mean, you always have to be ready to put on a case. At the end of the day, what it comes down to at the end of the government's case is how well do you feel it went in for us? And it's always risky to put on a defense case. People don't realize that, but there's always two sides to everything. And if you put on a witness, and even if it's, 70% good, if the prosecution scores some points, it can really undermine you. And so if you feel like the government's case has gone in really well for you, it can be actually riskier to call any witnesses. People don't necessarily realize that. But at the end of the day, we just made a decision that we thought the case had come in well, and we didn't want to, sort of change the dynamic in a way that could be risky for us.
Was Christina Coram ever potentially going to be called by the defense? We were all shocked why the government never chose to call her, since, I don't know, her name came up almost every single day through almost every witness. Was there a plan by the defense to call her?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific plans or non-plans, but it was more of an overall decision just not to put anyone on and just to use a few pieces of evidence that hadn't come in.
What do you think about the prosecution's choice not to call her? Because I will tell you, we did lunchtime shows, live shows with our audience. I would say 80% of the questions that we got during 7 weeks of testimony was, why is she not being called and will she be called? Were you surprised the prosecution chose not to call who was supposed to be the main alleged co-conspirator?
I mean, I don't think so. I think that she would have been a double-edged sword for them, and they probably didn't want to take the risk. As you saw during the trial, even a number of the witnesses that they had always planned to call that they did put in kind of blew up in their faces or had positive things to say about Sean that maybe they weren't anticipating. And so it would have been pretty risky for them to put Christina Coram on the stand.
But legal teams don't deal in headlines, they deal in strategy. And Diddy's team seems to believe that the tide is turning in their favor. It starts with one simple truth about the American legal system. Being accused is not the same as being convicted. And while the public has already rendered its verdict, the courts have not. The investigations, despite their scale and visibility, have yet to produce criminal charges. And for a defense team, that silence speaks volumes. What Diddy's attorneys are banking on is the gap between narrative and fact, between what the public believes and what prosecutors can prove. Civil suits are damaging, yes, but they operate on a different threshold of evidence. To win in a criminal court, the burden of proof is far higher beyond a reasonable doubt. And if that proof doesn't exist, or if it was obtained improperly, then even the most damning allegation can crumble under legal scrutiny. But it goes deeper than that. Sources close to the situation suggest that Diddy's team has been quietly dismantling the foundation of the case against him.
I think
there was so much being said about your client in that trial, obviously in the media, facing a number of different lawsuits. We also wondered whether or not he, and it's his decision alone, whether he wanted to take the stand and give his story, tell his story, give his version of events. Obviously, there are a ton of risks that come with putting a defendant on the stand, but it would be his choice. Was there a conversation about that?
Well, I mean, I can't get into, attorney-client privilege
Sure,
conversations. Obviously he thought about it, decided not to. And, as I indicated earlier, we thought the case had gone in really well for us. And so we liked where we were. So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, some of the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made. But I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs, should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. They had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail.
Attacking credibility, questioning timelines, highlighting inconsistencies. In court, perception doesn't matter. Only the facts do. And Diddy's lawyers are playing the long game piece by piece. The shock isn't just that they believe his freedom is near. It's that they're saying it with confidence. Because no legal team makes bold public claims unless they know something others don't. Unless they've seen the discovery, unless they've poked holes in the narrative behind closed doors. That doesn't mean Diddy is innocent. It doesn't mean the allegations are false. But it does mean that, legally speaking, this story might not end the way most people think. There's also the reality of the justice system's pace. Investigations can take months, even years. And during that time, public opinion can surge ahead, painting someone guilty before they ever step foot in a courtroom. Diddy's legal team knows this, and now they're using that gap to their advantage. While the media rushes to convict, they're preparing a defense designed not just to protect Diddy, but to restore him. It's also a warning, a quiet one. If the system can't pin him down legally, then all the noise won't matter. He may never return to the cultural pedestal he once occupied, but in the eyes of the law, he may walk away untouched, and that alone changes everything. Because if Diddy walks, the fallout will be massive. People who came forward may feel silenced. Advocates may feel betrayed. The industry will be forced to reckon with what happens when a man surrounded by so many accusations avoids prosecution altogether.
split down the middle. A lot of people upset with the jury's decision, but then there were a lot surprisingly celebrating the verdict. What are your thoughts?
Well, my entire time looking at the case, the charges, and listening, to the evidence as it came in during trial, I thought that depending upon how a person, be it a juror, be it the public, comes into the trial believing how someone who's a victim should act and how they believe relationships can evolve or devolve and fall apart is the lens that they would then make their verdict. Why I say that is because if you think a person who's battered, someone who's been a victim, someone who's been assaulted in the ways that were described, most people have an idea as to how they will respond and act towards that, or their expectation if it happened to their loved one, how they'd expect their loved one to act. And in those situations, you don't expect someone to be tweeting, you don't expect somebody to be sending texts telling their abuser that they love them or that they want more of what took place. However, there are other people who see it from maybe more so the lens of a victim or someone who's been abused, who would say, you know what, that's not so beyond the pale of reason, because the abuse has been so entrenched in this person's mind that they then fall in love with their abuser. And so that's not something that they would, look askance upon or look down upon. So, one of the things about being in trial that I always remind my clients, is that despite all the rules that the judge gives people, no one leaves their life experience or their opinions at the courthouse door. It all makes its way into the courtroom and ultimately into the jury room. And that's why you can see such people who are on one side, like celebrating Diddy being acquitted on the much more serious charges, and other people who are like, how did this happen? I am upset. I feel like victims did not get justice today.
Right, exactly. And emotions did run really high, especially when the verdict came down, because I think I myself was pretty surprised at some of the jury's decisions in relation to some of the charges where they found him not guilty. But, obviously they made their decision. They listened to the evidence. They saw all the exhibits, and they made the decision that they did. And say come sentencing that Sean Combs is sentenced to maybe a couple years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades, okay? And so
Importantly,
and most importantly,
it would signal to other powerful men that silence and strategy still work. But for now, the focus remains on Diddy's legal machine, a team of high-priced attorneys, investigators, and strategists who are working around the clock to ensure his empire doesn't fall. And slowly, they're reclaiming control of the narrative. Not by arguing in the press, but by putting faith in the system most have already dismissed. They're not fighting every accusation in the media. They're choosing their battles, and that's what makes it even more unsettling, because silence can be strategic, and in court the loudest voice rarely wins. It's the one with the cleanest case. If the evidence doesn't stick, if the witnesses contradict, if the prosecution falters, Diddy could walk, and not just walk, but emerge with a sense of vindication, not public redemption, but legal clarity, a technical freedom that doesn't erase what's been said, but does erase what can be done. This possibility has shaken the public because we've seen it before. Men accused of heinous acts walking free because the system wasn't airtight. Because justice requires perfection, and perfection is rare. Diddy's team is playing to that imperfection, exploiting every flaw, every hole, every procedural misstep. They know that if they can control the courtroom, the court of public opinion won't matter. They're focused, disciplined, and coldly precise. It's a reminder
and right now they believe they're winning. It's a reminder of how power operates. When you have enough money, enough influence, and the right legal minds behind you, freedom is always closer than it seems. And that's exactly what's happening here. Diddy's not just fighting for innocence. He's fighting to preserve a legacy, to keep the door open for a return, to show that no matter how many allegations surface, the law remains a shield for those who can afford it. And whether you believe he's guilty or not, that fact alone is chilling. The system doesn't always serve justice. Sometimes it serves strategy, and Diddy's team is running the playbook to perfection, slowly turning the tide, quietly pushing the narrative, and now publicly stating that his freedom is near. Not because the public forgives him, but because the law may not be able to stop him. And if that happens, it won't just be a win for Diddy. It'll be a message to everyone watching that even the most damning accusations can be outrun. That freedom isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's just about who has the better lawyer. Because in the end, justice is a game. And right now, Diddy's team believes they're playing it better than anyone else.